The crystalline spires of New Seoul Colony sparkled under the twin suns of the Andromeda system. Park Min-ho adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform as he stepped off the transport ship. His heart raced with both excitement and nervousness. This was his first major diplomatic mission representing Earth. The docking bay was unlike anything on Earth. Crystal structures rose from the ground like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces reflecting rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Alien technology seamlessly blended with artistic beauty, making Earth's most advanced facilities look primitive in comparison. "Welcome to New Seoul Colony, Diplomat Park," a melodious voice announced. An aide with silvery skin stepped forward, bowing in the traditional Earth manner. "I am Kori, your liaison. The reception begins in 1 standard hour." Min-ho followed Kori through towering corridors. Other diplomats from various star systems were already gathering for the trade negotiations. Some looked almost human, while others were completely alien in form. Min-ho had studied extensively for this mission, but seeing so many species in person still amazed him. "The Starlight Empire values punctuality," Kori explained, leading him to his preparation chamber. "Princess Hae-yun herself will be attending tonight's reception. It's quite rare for the royal family to grace such events." In his chamber, Min-ho reviewed his notes one final time. The Starlight Empire controlled crucial trade routes and possessed technology centuries ahead of Earth's. A successful negotiation could accelerate humanity's development by generations. The reception hall took his breath away. The ceiling seemed to vanish into space itself, showing actual stars twinkling above. Delegates from 100 worlds mingled beneath floating orbs of soft light. Min-ho squared his shoulders and entered the crowd. That's when he first saw her. Princess Hae-yun stood near a massive artwork, her skin glowing with subtle patterns of blue and gold. Unlike the elaborate outfits worn by other delegates, she wore a simple white dress that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Her eyes held an intelligence that made Min-ho forget his rehearsed greetings. "You're admiring the Unity sculpture," she said, approaching him. Her voice carried musical undertones that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "It's quite old, from before we achieved spaceflight." Min-ho bowed deeply. "Your Highness, the artwork is beautiful, though I must admit I'm having trouble interpreting its meaning." "Please, call me Hae-yun," she smiled. "And you're Park Min-ho, Earth's new diplomatic representative. I've read your proposals. Quite innovative thinking." They discussed the sculpture, Min-ho finding himself relaxing despite her royal status. Hae-yun's analytical mind matched her reputation. She quickly grasped his points about Earth's potential contributions to galactic trade. "This piece represents connection," Hae-yun explained, gesturing at the swirling metal and crystal structure. "See how the elements flow together. In our culture, we believe true understanding requires." She reached out to trace a pattern in the air. Min-ho, caught up in the moment, mirrored her gesture. Their hands met in front of the artwork, fingers briefly touching. The room fell silent. Hae-yun's bioluminescent patterns flared bright blue. Around them, delegates gasped. Kori dropped a serving tray with a crash. "Oh," Hae-yun whispered, her patterns now pulsing pink and gold. You just." Min-ho felt cold dread in his stomach. "Your Highness, have I caused offense?" "Not exactly," she said, looking both shocked and amused. "You just performed the bond touch ritual. In our culture, it's a formal declaration of courtship intent, traditionally reserved for royalty." Min-ho's diplomatic training hadn't covered this situation. He opened his mouth to apologize, but no words came out. Around them, delegates were already sending messages on their devices, no doubt spreading the news across the galaxy. "I must say," Hae-yun added, her skin now shimmering with what looked like suppressed laughter, "this is not how I expected tonight's reception to go. You humans certainly have unique ways of making first impressions." And just like that, Min-ho's simple diplomatic mission had turned into an interstellar incident. As palace guards approached and official recorders started documenting the event, He could only think one thing. Earth's diplomatic corps was going to have a very interesting report to read tomorrow morning. Hei-yun's final words before advisors whisked her away were surprisingly gentle. Don't worry too much, Diplomat Park. Sometimes the best connections are the unexpected ones. The news of Minho's accidental courtship ritual spread through the galaxy faster than light speed. Within hours, the grand halls of the Starlight Council chamber were filled with heated debate. The massive crystal dome above reflected the agitated patterns of the council members' bioluminescent skin, creating a chaotic light show. The bond touch is sacred. Elder Counselor Duha's voice echoed through the chamber. Once performed, it cannot be undone. Our laws are absolute on this matter. His skin flashed deep red with conviction. Meanwhile, in the Earth Embassy, Minho sat with his head in his hands as holographic messages from Earth poured in. The diplomatic corps was in complete disarray. Some saw it as a disaster, others as an unprecedented opportunity for human-alien relations. How could this happen? The Earth Ambassador's hologram paced back and forth. Of all the cultural misunderstandings possible, you accidentally proposed to their princess. I was just discussing art, Minho explained for what felt like the 100th time. Nobody briefed me about their courtship rituals. In her private chambers, Princess Hei-yun watched recordings of Minho's previous diplomatic missions. Her skin rippled with subtle gold patterns of interest as she observed his handling of complex negotiations. While other diplomats rely on artificial translators, he had learned multiple alien languages. His approach was different, more personal, more genuine. Your Highness, Royal Guardian Jaiwan entered, his tall frame casting a shadow across the room. The council awaits your statement. Surely you'll reject this accident. His skin showed patterns of deep disapproval. Hei-yun turned from the recordings. Why should I? Ji-won. Look at his record. He's accomplished more in 3 years than most diplomats achieve in 20. He's human. Jaiwan's patterns turned sharp with alarm. The royal bloodline has remained pure for 10,000 years. Think of tradition. Perhaps tradition needs to evolve, Hei-yun replied calmly. Our empire spans galaxies, yet we cling to ancient prejudices. The next morning, both civilizations watched as Princess Hei-yun addressed the Starlight Council. Her skin glowed with determined purpose as she spoke. The next morning, both civilizations watched as Princess Hei-yun addressed the Starlight Council. Her skin glowed with determined purpose as she spoke. The bond touch was performed before witnesses, she stated. Whether by accident or destiny, it happened. I choose to honor it. Her announcement sent shockwaves through the assembly. Jaiwan stepped forward, his patterns showing clear distress. Your Highness, I must object. This human knows nothing of our ways. He cannot protect you, cannot understand our culture's depth. Then he will learn, Hei-yun replied firmly. As I will learn of his culture. Isn't that the foundation of true diplomacy? Minho, watching from a separate chamber, felt a mix of anxiety and admiration. The princess was defending him, despite barely knowing him. Her diplomatic skill matched or exceeded his own. Earth's response was equally chaotic. Some politicians saw it as a chance to strengthen interstellar relations. Others feared Earth would become subordinate to the Starlight Empire. Military leaders worried about security implications. Cultural experts scrambled to learn everything about Starlight customs. As the debates raged, Hei-yun requested a private meeting with Minho. They met in the palace gardens, where crystal flowers chimed softly in the artificial breeze. I'm sorry for causing such chaos, Minho said immediately. Hei-yun's skin flickered with amusement. Don't be. Change often looks like chaos at first. She studied him thoughtfully. You're handling this well. Most would have fled by now. Running away rarely solves diplomatic crises, he replied, earning a musical laugh from the princess. That's exactly why I'm intrigued, she said. You see this as a diplomatic challenge to be solved, not a personal disaster to escape. Their conversation was interrupted by Jaiwan's arrival. Your Highness, the council requires your presence. And you, human. His pattern showed barely contained hostility. Remember your place. As they parted ways, He-Yun's skin briefly flashed a pattern that Minho didn't recognize. Later, he would learn it was the royal family's symbol for hope. The political storm was far from over, but something unexpected was happening. Two individuals from vastly different worlds were discovering that sometimes the best diplomatic solutions came from the heart rather than protocol manuals. The royal study room, with its walls of living crystal, became Minho and He-Yun's sanctuary over the following weeks. Traditional protocol required them to spend at least 4 hours together daily, learning about each other's cultures. What started as a formal obligation slowly transformed into something both looked forward to. Minho brought traditional Korean tea one morning, carefully preparing it the way his grandmother had taught him. He-Yun's skin rippled with curiosity as she watched the ritual. "This reminds me of our light-sharing ceremony," she said, accepting the delicate cup. The careful movements, the respect for each element. Her patterns shifted to a deep blue of concentration as she tasted the tea. It's fascinating how both our cultures find meaning in such precise actions. In return, He-Yun introduced Minho to starlight technology. She showed him how their quantum computers used crystalline matrices to process information, her hands dancing through holographic displays as she explained complex concepts in simple terms. "Your understanding of physics is impressive," Minho commented, watching her manipulate quantum equations in midair. "I studied theoretical physics before joining the diplomatic course." He-Yun's skin flickered with pleasant surprise. "Really? Most diplomats I meet specialize in politics or law. What made you change paths?" "I realized understanding how the universe works helps understand how people work," he explained. "Everything connects, just in different ways." Their conversations often drifted to music. Minho introduced He-Yun to Earth's classical compositions, while she shared recordings of starlight harmonies, complex mathematical patterns translated into sound. They discovered that despite having entirely different musical scales, both cultures used music to express similar emotions. "Listen to this part," Minho said one day, playing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. "The way the music builds, layer by layer." He-Yun's skin pulsed in time with the music. "We have something similar in our cosmic symphony." Here, she activated a crystal, filling the room with otherworldly sounds that somehow complemented Beethoven's work perfectly. Their cultural exchange wasn't always smooth. During a lesson about starlight customs, Minho accidentally used the wrong greeting pattern, causing He-Yun to burst into musical laughter. "Don't worry," she said, seeing his embarrassment. "You just told me I have the wisdom of a baby star squid." Her skin sparkled with amusement as she helped him correct the gesture. One day, while discussing family traditions, they found another surprising parallel. Minho described the Korean tradition of ancestor remembrance, and He-Yun's patterns shifted to deep purple with recognition. "We have the pattern preservation ritual," she explained. "We record the light patterns of our ancestors, keeping their memories alive through their unique frequencies. The meaning is so similar, just expressed differently." Jaewon, who often observed their sessions from a distance, noticed the growing ease between them with increasing concern. He watched as they moved from formal exchanges to comfortable conversations, from careful distance to casual proximity. "Your Highness," he interrupted one afternoon, "it's time for the council meeting." He-Yun's patterns showed slight irritation at the interruption. They had been discussing the similarities between Korean folk tales and starlight legends. "Thank you, Jaewon." "Minho, shall we continue tomorrow? I'm curious about the end of the story about the tiger and the persimmon." As they spent more time together, both began incorporating elements of each other's cultures into their daily lives. Minho started using subtle hand movements that mimicked starlight communication patterns, while He-Yun adopted some Korean expressions in her speech. Their learning sessions became the talk of both Earth and the Starlight Empire. Some saw it as a beautiful example of cultural integration, while others worried about the dilution of traditional ways. But in their study room, surrounded by books from Earth and crystal records from the stars, none of that seemed to matter. One evening, as they watched the twin suns set through the crystal walls, Hei-yun's skin displayed a pattern Minho had never seen before. "What does that pattern mean?" he asked. She hesitated before answering, her glow softening. "It's an ancient pattern, one used to show deep understanding. When someone truly begins to see beyond surface differences." Minho smiled, understanding the significance of what she wasn't saying. Sometimes the best cultural exchanges happen not in grand gestures or formal ceremonies, but in quiet moments of shared discovery. The grand hall of the Starlight Court fell silent as noble Sangmin strode forward, his skin flashing aggressive patterns of challenge. His formal announcement echoed through the crystal chamber. "I contest the human's right to court Princess Hei-yun." Minho stood calmly, though his heart raced. He'd studied the challenge protocols extensively since arriving. Sangmin, from one of the oldest Starlight families, was known for his traditional views and military prowess. By ancient law, Sangmin continued, any courtship challenge requires the completion of 3 trials. Does the human accept? Before Minho could respond, Hei-yun's patterns flared with concern. "The trials were designed for our people, not humans. This is unfair." Then he should withdraw his claim. Sangmin's skin rippled with satisfaction. "I accept the challenge." Minho's voice carried clearly across the hall. The assembled nobles' patterns flickered with surprise. No off-worlder had ever attempted the trials. The first trial began at dawn, mastering light manipulation. In the Chamber of Radiance, Minho faced a wall of crystal prisms. The task was to direct light through them, to create specific patterns. Impossible without bioluminescent abilities, Sangmin smirked. But Minho had spent nights studying physics. He adjusted each prism's angle precisely, using mathematics instead of natural ability. When the light formed the perfect pattern, even Sangmin's patterns showed grudging respect. The second trial involved solving ancient stellar puzzles. In the archive chamber, Minho faced holographic star maps that had puzzled Starlight scholars for generations. The traditional approach was to trace established navigation patterns. These puzzles test one's understanding of cosmic flows, the archive keeper explained. Most spend years studying them. Minho looked at the stars differently. Instead of following traditional paths, he found new connections. His human perspective saw patterns that Starlight scholars had overlooked. When he completed the final puzzle, Hei-yun's skin glowed with pride. The final trial tested leadership wisdom. Minho entered the simulation chamber, where he faced various scenarios challenging his judgment. The first showed a diplomatic crisis between rival star systems. "There is no correct solution," Jai-1 explained. "It tests how one handles impossible choices." Minho approached each scenario with a blend of Earth diplomacy and his understanding of Starlight values. Rather than choosing sides, he found ways to transform conflicts into opportunities for cooperation. "Remarkable," one elder whispered. "He doesn't think like us, yet he understands us." The final scenario was the most challenging, a choice between saving an ancient Starlight artifact or preventing a natural disaster. Instead of choosing, Minho found a way to use the artifact's properties to prevent the disaster, preserving both. When the trials concluded, even Sangmin couldn't deny Minho's success. "You completed them differently than any Starlight noble would," he admitted, his patterns showing confusion mixed with respect. Hei-yun approached Minho, her skin displaying the royal pattern of approval. "You showed us that different doesn't mean wrong. Sometimes fresh eyes see clearer paths." The court gathered to formally acknowledge Minho's right to continue the courtship. As he stood before them, he realized something important. The trials hadn't just tested him, they'd helped him understand the Starlight people better. "Your methods were unconventional," Jai-1 noted later, "but perhaps that's what our traditions needed, someone to look at them anew." Minho's success became a testament to the potential of human Starlight cooperation. He had proven that understanding and respect could bridge even the widest gaps between stars and species. The first signs of trouble came during a routine trade route review. Minho noticed irregularities in the shipping logs between Earth and Starlight colonies. Ships were disappearing, only to reappear with their cargo mysteriously intact, but their crews telling different stories about their delays. These patterns are too precise to be accidents, Hei-yun observed, her skin showing concerned ripples as they examined the data in her private study. Her patterns shifted to alert mode when Minho pointed out another anomaly. All these incidents happened along routes managed by Counselor Yun Seo's trading guild. Minho noted, Yun Seo, a powerful traditionalist leader, had openly opposed Earth-Starlight relations from the start. Their investigation deepened. Late at night, they pored over transmission logs and security footage. Hei-yun's royal access combined with Minho's fresh perspective helped them spot things others had missed. They discovered encrypted messages hidden in routine trade signals. One evening, while reviewing security feeds, Hei-yun's pattern suddenly flared with recognition. That signal pattern, it's an ancient military code. My father taught me about it. They're planning something big. When decoded, the messages revealed a shocking plot. Yun Seo's faction planned to attack key trade routes, making it look like Earth ships were responsible. The resulting diplomatic crisis would destroy the alliance and end any chance of human Starlight integration. We need proof that will stand up in both Earth and Starlight courts, Minho said, his diplomatic training kicking in. Hei-yun agreed, her patterns showing determination. They began carefully gathering evidence, knowing one wrong move would alert Yun Seo. Hei-yun used her royal authority to access restricted areas, while Minho applied Earth intelligence techniques to track the conspiracy's money trail. During their investigation, they grew closer. Long nights of work led to shared meals and personal conversations. Hei-yun taught Minho to read subtle pattern languages that even other Starlight nobles had forgotten. He showed her Earth methods of deductive reasoning. Their breakthrough came during a diplomatic reception. Minho noticed Yun Seo's deputies using specific gesture patterns to communicate across the room. Hei-yun's skin flashed with excitement. They were using the same military code from the transmissions. We need to get into Yun Seo's private archives, Hei-yun whispered. That's where the original orders will be stored. The plan they devised was risky. While Hei-yun distracted the council with a royal inspection, Minho would access the archives using security codes she had authority to grant. What they didn't expect was Yun Seo's trap. Looking for something human. Yun Seo's voice froze Minho at the archive entrance. His security team surrounded Minho, weapons ready. But Minho smiled. Actually, yes. We were looking for you to make exactly this move. Hei-yun appeared with royal guards and Ji-won himself. Your security protocols triggered a silent alert when you armed them against a royal guest. She explained, her patterns showing royal authority. That's treason by our oldest laws. The evidence they found in the archives was devastating. Complete attack plans, forged Earth documents, and records of bribes paid to corrupt officials in both governments. The conspiracy unraveled quickly after that. Later, in the palace gardens, Hei-yun's patterns showed a mix of relief and something deeper. You risked everything to help protect my people, she said softly. They're becoming my people too, Minho replied, now able to read the subtle patterns of affection in her glow. The exposure of Yun Seo's plot had an unexpected effect. Many who had opposed the human Starlight Alliance now saw its value. The partnership between Minho and Hei-yun became a symbol of what their civilizations could achieve together. What had started as a diplomatic crisis had transformed into something neither of them had expected, a partnership based on trust, respect, and growing affection that transcended their different origins. The crystalline halls of the Starlight Palace glowed with somber light as the council made their announcement. After the recent conspiracy's exposure, they had found an ancient law that could release both Hei-yun and Minho from their accidental bond without losing face. The law of stellar grace, Elder Duhat explained, his patterns showing formal dignity. It allows dissolution of a bond touch if both parties agree it serves the greater good. Minho stood quietly, his diplomatic mask hiding the turmoil within. Over these months, what had started as an accident had become the most meaningful relationship of his life. Still, he knew his duty. Hei-yun's skin showed no readable patterns, a sign of deep emotional control that worried those who knew her best. She had grown quieter in recent days, spending long hours in the ancient library. The dissolution ceremony was scheduled for the next full alignment of the twin suns. As preparations began, Minho threw himself into final diplomatic duties, working to ensure the Earth-Starlight alliance would survive his departure. "You don't have to do this," Jai-Wan told him privately, his pattern showing unexpected concern. "You've proven yourself worthy." "Sometimes peace requires personal sacrifice," Minho replied, remembering his first diplomatic lesson. Hei-yun watched him from afar, her heart conflicting with her royal duties. She saw how he helped prepare trade agreements that would benefit both their peoples, even as he prepared to leave. The night before the ceremony, Hei-yun found Minho in their study room, where they had spent so many hours learning about each other's worlds. He was looking at their first shared cup of tea, now preserved in crystal. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "The bond touch." Minho turned to her, his voice gentle. "How could I regret something that showed me wonders I never imagined? But your people need you to be free to make the best choice for them." Hei-yun's patterns shifted through complex emotions. And what if the best choice isn't the expected one? Before he could respond, ceremony preparations called them away. That night, neither slept well, both wrestling with duties and desires. The dissolution ceremony began at dawn. The great hall was filled with dignitaries from both worlds. As Minho took his place, memories flooded his mind. Hei-yun's laughter as she taught him pattern language, her brilliant insights during their investigation, the way her patterns danced when she was excited about a new discovery. Hei-yun stood across from him, her royal robes shimmering. Each step toward the center of the bridge would break part of their bond. She took the first step, her patterns unreadable. Minho matched her step, accepting the necessity. Another step. The crystal beneath them hummed with ancient power. Halfway across, they would meet one final time before parting forever. Hei-yun's steps slowed. Her patterns began to show confusion, then clarity. She stopped. The assembly murmured in surprise. "I studied our oldest laws," she announced, her voice carrying across the hall. The bond touch was created not just for tradition, but to recognize true connections across any distance or difference. Minho held his breath as she continued. "We've faced trials together, uncovered truths together, learned and grown together. That's not an accident. That's exactly what the bond touch was meant to find." Her patterns burst into the royal colors of decision. "I choose not to dissolve this bond, not for tradition, not for politics, but because it's real." Minho's diplomatic mask finally cracked, showing every emotion he'd hidden. "Are you sure? The consequences will be something we face together," she finished, her patterns showing the deep affection she'd been hiding. "Like we always have." The hall erupted in chaos, but standing there on the crystal bridge, they finally saw their path clearly. Sometimes the bravest choice was not letting go, but holding on despite all odds. The grand hall of light blazed with a brilliance never before seen, as thousands of crystals reflected the joy of two civilizations uniting. The wedding ceremony of Princess Hei-yun and Park Minho combined traditions that spanned galaxies, creating something entirely new. Minho wore a modernized hanbok, its dark fabric embedded with living crystals that pulsed in harmony with Hei-yun's natural patterns. Hei-yun's wedding dress combined the flowing lines of traditional Korean design with starlight crystalline elements, her bioluminescence creating patterns that told stories of both worlds. "Today marks not just a union of two people," Elder Duha announced, his patterns showing formal blessing, "but a bridge between stars." The ceremony began with the Korean tradition of tea sharing. Minho's grandmother had traveled from Earth to perform it, her aged hand steady as she prepared the sacred drink. Heiyun's patterns showed deep respect as she accepted the cup, understanding the millennia of human tradition it represented. Then came the starlight bond weaving. Heiyun's patterns reached out, intertwining with the crystals in Minho's clothing. The hall gasped as Minho's crystals responded, creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible for a human to achieve. He's learned to resonate, Jai-Won whispered, his patterns showing amazement. The former guardian had become one of their strongest supporters, seeing how their differences strengthened rather than weakened them. As they exchanged vows, each spoke in both languages. Minho's careful pronunciation of ancient starlight phrases matched Heiyun's perfect Korean. Their words created patterns in the air, human and starlight languages weaving together in new ways. The witnesses included Earth's highest officials and the Starlight Empire's most ancient houses, but more importantly, there were others, human starlight couples who had been inspired by their story to reveal their own relationships. What had seemed impossible months ago was now becoming accepted. During the celebration feast, traditional Korean dishes sat alongside starlight crystal-grown delicacies. Music from both worlds played together, creating unexpected harmonies. Diplomats who had once argued about trade routes now discussed cultural exchange programs. "Look what we started," Heiyun whispered to Minho, her patterns showing joy and mischief. "All because you couldn't keep your hands off ancient artwork." Minho laughed, now able to read her patterns as clearly as any starlight noble. "Best diplomatic mistake I ever made." Their union immediately affected both civilizations. New protocols were established for interspecies marriages, using their ceremony as a template. Trade routes expanded as cultural understanding grew. Scientific cooperation flourished as human creativity combined with starlight technology. But perhaps most importantly, their story gave hope to others. Across the galaxy, people of different species began to see past their differences, learning to appreciate rather than fear what made them unique. As the twin suns set on their wedding day, Minho and Heiyun stood on the crystal balcony overlooking both their worlds. Earth shone bright in the distance while starlight cities sparkled below. "Ready for our next adventure?" Heiyun asked, her patterns showing the deep love she no longer needed to hide. "With you?" "Always," Minho replied, taking her hand as their patterns synchronized in the gathering darkness, lighting the way forward for all who would follow. Their story would be told for generations, not just as a royal romance, but as proof that love could bridge the gaps between stars, teaching all species that the greatest strength comes not from staying separate, but from joining together, creating something new and beautiful from the best of both worlds.